Well, let's point out a few news articles. This one was pretty amazing. One of the guys that makes a troll claiming that Fauci is a traitor and there is no virus and all the masks are just a lie from the government actually works for the National Institute of Health as a public relations official. And nobody knew. The Daily Beast went and analyzed it. This is a fact that a lot of people have demonstrated, that if you think you're anonymous, you change your name and make another email account and post on some blog, it's almost always pretty easy to track down who you really are because you leave a trail of it. And so this guy for years, William B. Cruz, worked for the National Institute of Health in the public relations department and then secretly undid all the work on one of these fanatic right-wing blog posts. It is very strange. And after this article came out, he got fired or decided to retire. But it's, our whole nation is suffering from these QAnon and other right-wing conspiracy theory madnesses, and they hit people like religions or insanity and make them nuts. A large portion of Americans are falling into this crazy space where it's awful hard to understand how we can work together when half of us are just insane, or maybe a third of us. Anyway, and in his same spirit, in San Francisco, an HR department somebody working here, and apparently several people have been just lying to people to come to them with discrimination complaints. They tell them that there's going to be a settlement and there's money coming when there was no settlement, there's no money coming. They tell them their forms have been filed when they haven't been filed, and they just give them a bunch of lies until they'll give up and go away. So this is pretty shocking. And apparently it's been going on for a while, and apparently involves a lot of claimants and a lot of people. So there's been a lot coming out about corruption in the San Francisco government, which is famously very corrupt. And that's another one of them. So this is an interesting article, and I think this is a good idea. They want to probably over the next decade or so, they should increase the size of the Supreme Court. I don't know. Everybody's had a lot to say about Ruth Bader Ginsburg dying. But the thing that I thought is, why do we have this crazy system where these sick old people with cancer have to stay on the job for decades when they probably would have retired earlier, and the whole world rests on them not quitting? This is like the Pope or something. This is like an ancient medieval system where you appoint people for life, as if that one person was so special that you couldn't find any more people of equal value. It's extremely clear that the Supreme Court appointments I've seen in my lifetime might as well have been random people pulled out of the phone book. So I don't see why we don't just have a large court with enough people, because I've worked at companies where I'm the only indispensable person and I have to work every weekend and work every night. And if I get sick, I can't take a day off because nobody can possibly fill in for me. And I got fed up with it. This is just stupid. There's no reason to organize things that way. So I'm all for increasing the size of the court anyway. There's other reasons some people want to do it right now, but I think it's ridiculous that we have these people put up there like superheroes as if the whole world relied on that one person and there's nobody else that could possibly substitute. Anyway, so this is a psychiatrist who worked with Nazis and analyzed the people who worked in the death camps and the doctors that experimented on human subjects. And so when he tells you that Trump is doing exactly what the Nazis did, it carries a lot more weight than just random people who don't really know Nazis. This guy really does know the psychology of Nazis. And he says the same thing that the more folksy people have said, that this pattern of just publicly breaking the law, lying constantly until you just give up on the concept of truth, these are the ways that you degrade society to where people will just accept him staying in when his term of office is over and sending out a bunch of vigilantes to kill people and stuff like that. This is how societies decay into totalitarianism. Anyway, in Madrid, they tried to HUD the opera, and they filled up the seats without any spaces between them, and the people in the audience screamed and protested until they had to cancel the concert, cancel the opera. And so that's pretty impressive. And they're locking down Madrid because of coronavirus. This is a society that has got proper high morale. They really want to stop the virus. The people are really on board with it. Like most countries, America has been the worst at handling the virus because we're internally divided. We're not on the same page. About a third or a half of us just think there is nothing wrong and it's all a lie or something. And that's from the fantastic opposite of leadership at the top. Trump has encouraged the craziest people to do the most destructive stuff in America instead of bringing us together. So yeah, this is, like I say, people ask me how long we're going to be locked down, and I think for years, because Trump's current policy is to just spread it deliberately. And so if Trump wins again, we'll never get out of the woods. If Biden wins, he's going to have to start digging us out of a deep hole, and it'll take at least a year or two to dig out of that hole, in my opinion, because you can't get anywhere until you get most of the people to go along with you. And I'm not sure that anybody can do that anymore because we're very, very split. So this H.R. McMaster was the National Security Advisor. And again, he's another one of the people that knows exactly what the Russians are doing. They're meddling with our election. And yet Trump just completely lies and denies it on all occasions. He never can say anything against Putin. That's why most people think Putin has something on him. But anyway, he's another person talking about this, how it is ridiculous. We know exactly what the Russians are doing. We know which people are doing it. We know what they're doing to us. They're doing it more than ever. And having our government unable to respond or stop them because our leader wants to lie and say it's not happening places us in a bad position. And Trump did replace the Postmaster General with this guy, DeJoy, and they have now shown that he did, in fact, break the post office. So it is, in fact, much worse than it ever has been. It used to have a 93% success rate at delivering mail on time, but when DeJoy took over, that dropped down in some areas to 60% or less. This is a nationwide average. You can get the areas here. And then finally the scandal came out. They saw him taking out the sorting machines, taking out the post boxes, and the end result was it came back up. This thing is not moving for some reason, but anyway, but it didn't come back up very far. And a lot of places are still down around 60%. So this was part of Trump's plan to rig the election by delaying the mail-in ballots. He said that openly. And it looks like it worked. DeJoy did manage to destroy the post office infrastructure so that the mail is much slower. So it is all voter suppression, which is the only way Trump ever got in, and the only way Republicans have been getting in for a long time, is by preventing most of the people from voting. So we will see. But it's everybody should really vote and be aware of the fact that they will put obstacles in your way and make it hard to vote. But that shows how much you really want to vote. And because this may be the last free election we ever have, if you want to call this one free. Anyway, there was something that came out a few days ago about some huge financial scandal coming out, and this is it. The incident reports, like security incident reports, suspicious transaction reports from companies have now leaked. And they leaked to several news agencies, and they each got a portion of them, and there's just a lot of stories coming out. This one here is about how North Korea launders their money. North Korea laundered, I think, $1 trillion through American banks. And what's going on is this has leaked out, and everybody's very upset in the banking industry saying those are private documents and shouldn't have leaked out, because what they show is, I've heard for years that if you move $10,000, that leads to a report to the government of a suspicious transaction. And it does, and that's what these are. But what they find is people say, look, here's a huge amount of money coming from North Korea. It's obviously fake. They have a whole series of transactions all in like suspiciously round and equal amounts. They're obviously moving a huge amount of money, and it's almost certainly something illegal. That's what it says. And they file it and don't do anything about it and just let it go through for years. And that's what all these are. Huge, all the major banks and are just doing, and what they're evading American sanctions on other countries and laundering money that's stolen from cryptocurrency exchanges in the case of North Korea. And all the banks know exactly what's happening. They're just letting it go through. This reminds me of the income tax preparers, Intuit. I knew a little bit. One of the guys, the database, the whistleblower on the inside was the database engineer that found you can totally see who's using stolen identities to file false tax returns. Because you can see one person filing many tax returns for many different people, and they're not a tax preparer. So he totally found out who they are and told the boss, and the boss said, shut up, don't investigate this. We are not required to do anything about it. We are not police. They're paying us a fee to use our service. They're just a customer from our point of view, and it's none of our business, and we have no responsibility to try to prevent them from using our service to commit crimes. And that went to court, and I'm not sure whatever came of it. It is an interesting argument. It is not entirely clear whether it is your responsibility to prevent crime on your platform. This goes up to Facebook, essentially. Facebook totally facilitates foreign election meddling and and the Republican committees and such carefully using Facebook to manipulate with the election. And no one really quite knows what your responsibility is when someone is using your platform to commit a crime, but you're not exactly deliberately doing it. I think it's a gray area. Anyway, so this is part of it hitting the public anyway. And this was kind of fun, this Android thing. Like, yeah, this guy found a vulnerability on Android phones where if you have Firefox on the phone, he can send a message from this one and then force all the others to open a page. Open the same page, everything nearby, because Firefox has some kind of ability to share links. I've seen this, and somehow it's gone wrong. So he can trick phones into opening a page without people wanting to open that page. And then, of course, you could presumably infect it with malware or something if you found another vulnerability. Anyway, so that's enough of that stuff, and let's get down to the official business. So we're here. It is the 21st, and we're talking about these things, the scope of the incident and the live data collection. So let me find my slides, which are here. All right. Now let's talk about that. Good. All right. So the first thing you have to do is scope the incident. You decide how big the problem is, and that gives you a clue what you want to do. So you have something that caused you to detect an incident, some kind of event occurred, and you quickly have to decide how big is the problem, and therefore what should we do? If it might be something where you can safely accumulate more evidence, it might be an ongoing emergency where you must do something drastic immediately, like take down servers, disconnect network connections, because something terrible is happening that you can't tolerate. So you look at the original alert. An incident handler will hopefully be able to be more knowledgeable and make an evaluation of this. The person who reported it might have been wrong or misunderstood it. Try to verify everything if possible, and gather data, context for the event. So now you determine what sources of preliminary evidence may help. Your first thing is to find some kind of other evidence you can get quickly that will help you decide exactly what you've got here. I mean, typically you get in that world of tech support, somebody will say, I can't get my email. And that could be anything. It could be a broken network card on that machine. It could be a server is down. It could be a router is down. It could be your ISP is disconnected. You know, there are many different scopes of problem. And your first question is, how big is the problem? So, for example, you find malware. The machine has malware. So if you want to find artifacts, you can find things like files and registry keys, things in the Windows prefetch, and so on, perhaps network artifacts. Those are things that would help you decide what you can use to quickly see if other machines are also infected. And you also want independent sources. You don't want to just have many measurements of the same machine. If you can avoid it, you'd much be better to have firewall logs in addition, because the attacker might have tried to clean up after themselves. How good is auto runs? Auto runs is excellent. Auto runs is a sysinternals product, and Mark Russinovich is always hitting a 10. So auto runs, in my experience, is wonderful. It really does find more of everything automatically starting than any other tool I know. Anyway, so you try to cross-check information from multiple sources. That makes it much more likely that you'll have accurate information. And then you review it. And your immediate job, of course, is there still an attacker on the network? Are they still causing more damage? All right. And so now you can choose a course of action. You try to choose actions that will give you useful information quickly. But you have to be careful that you didn't just jump to an assumption and race down one path without considering other assumptions. So this is the trick. All right. And so make sure and use multiple independent sources of evidence. Try not to do something that is going to bog you down in a lot of heavy work if there's somebody to avoid it. And of course, notice if what you have is an emergency. This is very much like dealing with real physical crime. You may know police have rules of evidence handling and rules of everything. And there is something called exigent circumstances when it's an emergency, when you're allowed to break all those rules. And the same thing here. All right, so here's a scenario. Suppose you got a retailer and customers are complaining that after they sign up for your shop, they get spam email. Now, that could just be a coincidence. You don't even know it's coming from you, But so you don't even know how much to take it seriously. So here's some options. First thing would be to talk to the customers, get more information about what they got, and decide if they really appear to have got email from you. But if you want to find out about their email, there's a privacy problem there. Probably a much more productive thing to do is to make fake customer accounts under your control and then see if they get email. Then you can really control the situation. So they decide to do that. So you make random accounts that cannot happen by chance reasonably, and then you monitor those accounts. So while you're waiting for spam email to come in those accounts, you say, well, assuming that spam email does come in those accounts, how would this happen? So apparently somehow our customer data is being leaked out to a spammer. So where is the data? And you turn out there's one internal database and there's a third-party marketing term that the data is sent to. So either one of those could be the source of it. So the customer is a mainstream commercial product with advanced query monitoring, and it's huge and has a lot of traffic. And the data can come in either through the website or manually through a phone call. So those are the only two methods. There are backups also. And the marketing data gets data on a regular basis. So all these are possible ways that data could be leaking out. So the marketing firm, you can eliminate because of time. Since they only get updated infrequently, there were people getting spam before that those records are moved. Coming in, stealing records or calling in on the phone is pretty difficult. Realistically, you're only going to get stolen once you're on the computer network. And so you could try catching the traffic going into the database server, but that is a huge amount of traffic and probably encrypted. It's probably far better to just use an advanced query to query what kind of transactions have been processed. That will give you a much more reasonable, focused bit of data. So here's some theories. You might imagine that one of your insiders is selling the data to a criminal. That is possible, but it's no easy way to test it. This is a problem we've talked about before. Detecting insider threats is very difficult. And so you might say, this is a possibility, but let's see if we can find some other explanation, because that one is going to be hard to find and hard to fix. Another possibility is that your website is capturing email addresses. So now you can test that by putting in some accounts directly in the database without using the web form. Somebody could be copying the backup tapes. So you use what they call a barium meal. You put fake addresses on the backup tapes. So that if they're using that as a spam source, they'll send there. And so a couple of weeks later, you get spam. And now you can see it went to the data manually entered. So it's not the website. And it didn't have the extra ones on the backup tape, so that eliminates some options. This is what you do. You trim the problem. So now you got new theories. One possibility is that it's directly changing the database with malware on the server or some kind of network access. You could try doing network level packet captures, but that's really a drag, as you've seen. What's a lot better is to just do query monitoring and logging, so that you don't have to log all the network traffic. What you have to do is log the transactions on the database that are adding email addresses to the database and removing email addresses from the database. So make some more fake accounts, talk to the administrators, look through the logs, and see if you can find any queries already running that are stealing large amounts of data. And eventually, by looking at the logs on a database, you find a single query that steals all the emails for a time period of a couple of weeks. And so somebody is logging into the server and executing a command to steal the email addresses, and you can get the source IP. So you know it's coming from part of your company, and you go there, and now you know who's doing it, but they're doing it with the database administrator's account, which should not be coming from that location. So you have a clue here. Somehow they're using some other account on an unexpected machine. So these are good leads. And so now you've got a summary of your situation. So you go to that machine that is called for provoking the queries, and you collect the data from it, a live response, forensic images, and then check to see if who's been using this machine and so on. And then you go to the database server and collect what you can. Now, you can't really collect the RAM or the hard drive from a database server because they're huge, but you can collect logs and a live response, which is just a series of queries, very much like a log. So now on the workstation, you can find malware that connects to a foreign IP and has been there for 2 years. So apparently somebody has been using your system for years before you found out. And you don't have logs far enough back to know where it came from. So Now you're done. All you have to do, you found out what happened. You need to clean that machine, but before you do that, you need to find out what else was infected. So now you find some indicators of compromise, like registry keys or something, and check the rest of your machines to see if other people are infected, and check to see if there's other traffic from that IP address. And that might be a good enough response to this one. There are mistakes you could have made. For example, after customers are complaining, you could then assume that somebody inside the company is copying the data and then spend your time in the company looking for copies of that data. But that's kind of pointless because you jumped to a conclusion that someone inside your company was involved without a reason, and it could very well be encrypted or compressed. So you wouldn't find it by looking for strings anyway. So it's very easy to go in the wrong direction and waste all your time doing something stupid that is not going to be productive. Another unwise path would be to focus on assuming someone in a company did it, and now you try to figure out who in the company is untrustworthy with things like background checks and video surveillance. And this is how you just drive everybody nuts, and it's very unlikely to succeed. Another unwise path would be to spend a lot of time analyzing a database server to hunt for malware on the database server, but it's a huge, complicated system and hard to investigate, and not that most likely to be the explanation. It's much more likely that an end device will be infected, which is likely to have email and surfing the web and other avenues of infection. So, all right. There's another one. You can have automated clearinghouse fraud. So somebody transferred a large bank balance. They attempted to make a large electronic transfer, which was blocked. And so this came from the chief financial officer's account, where they said they didn't authorize it. So you know when they did it, the source IP address was indeed from your company. So apparently someone at your company made this request. You can look at the logs, and the logs show that it really did come from the CFO's laptop computer. So you can find out when this happened, and they're both the CFO's machines. So you gather complete forensic evidence from the machines, and this, by the way, is an issue of volatility. You want to get evidence quickly because memory and network connections fade. So you try to get data from the machines involved quickly because as they get used, data is lost. And so you find that the data is coming from the laptop, but the chief financial officer says they were out. That person was not working at the time when this happened. And so, all right. So now you know what machine it came from, and you have evidence from that machine, and you have the person who appears to be the owner saying that they're innocent. So now you got theories. Somebody else could have gone in the office. There could be malware on it. And so you can analyze these theories, and eventually you find malware on it. They've got banking Trojan on their machine. So that is reasonable. And now you just need to determine when it was infected and then find indicators of compromise and see what else in your network is infected. And you have your firewall logs to see what else has been connecting to these IPs. And that's a reasonable response to that incident. So here's things you could have gone wrong. One thing I don't know if anybody still believes this, but there was a time maybe 5 years ago where a lot of people believed that antivirus was perfect. And if we use antivirus, that means there's no malware. So that means we couldn't be us. So it had to be the bank losing it with a problem at the bank. Or it had to be the CFO betraying us. There's no way it could have been the malware. So here's another one. Now, by the way, if you are a typical technical incident responder and they tell you to investigate the CFO, one issue is you're not a psychologist or a human detective like a cop, so it's really outside your expertise probably to evaluate whether a human is betraying the company. But anyway, certainly anyone that believes that you don't have any malware just because you're running antivirus is badly out of date. There's tons of malware that sneaks past antivirus. It removes some of the threats, but you can't at all imagine that it's perfect. Anyway, let's take a look here. This is 152. I think that's chapter 6. Yeah. All right. All right. Read this one. Oh, they've changed things a bit, haven't they? All right. All right, I'll give it a few more seconds. Oh, well, all right. We could get up to 10, I guess. 1, 2, we're up to 8. I doubt we'll get higher than that. All right. All right, so Coke is sure Pepsi did it. So what should you do? Yeah. These are both pretty good answers, but probably the best is alternate theories. I mean, when someone tells you they're sure who did it, it's extremely unlikely that they're really sure. And you want to first consider there may be other people that have done it. If your customer demands that you follow only one path, then you're not really helping them. You need to push back against that and get them to realize that, you shouldn't just assume you know what the answer is before we do the investigation. All right. All right, so Mint got hacked and customers are downloading infected files. This really happened a couple of years ago. So what should you do? Right, I mean, the house is on fire. First, you have to stop that before you do anything else. So this really happened to Mint. Somebody infected it and put up a poison files and changed the MD5 hashes on the machine so that they appeared to be correct. All right. All right, so your database server shows suspicious queries and the administrator wants to image the storage area network. So what should you do? You got to find something else like just log files. A storage area network is huge. It's a huge job to image all that. And that is just not getting you closer to the end because now you just have a huge pile of data to wade through. If you want to understand what's happening on a database server, you can just get query logs. It's far more productive. All right, your CEO demands that you hack the attacker back. So what should you do? Yeah, that's good. I've had some of my students that work in the business call me and say they were asked to do illegal things, and I said, just don't do it. It's not worth it. Um, all right. Your customer does not have the ability to authorize you doing something illegal, and there's no reason to put up with that. All right. All right. Good. So live data collection is what we talk about a lot, where you don't image an entire hard drive or all of RAM, but you run a script that harvests useful information quickly. So you're trying to make something that quickly gives you a usable amount of information without crashing the system or burdening the network too much. So you consider almost always the volatile data matters. And so you figure out a way to run it quickly without changing the target very much. And if you have a lot of systems, then you have to be even more conservative in trying to burden them only a small amount. And like I say, forensic duplications of all the RAM or all the hard drive are expensive, and you want to minimize those. Unless, of course, you are trying to prepare data for a lawsuit. And then if you're going to go to court, it's often helpful to have complete images of the machines so they can't claim that you missed something. So it's an issue there. Anyway, so your live response is going to involve running some kind of script that does some kind of queries, typically over a network, and you got to test it because it might fail, it might crash things, and so on. So make sure that you have approval, of course, both to burden the system to this extent and also to authorize you to collect this data. All right, so live response is a new modern technique used by incident responders and modern forensic analysts. The old days, saying more than 10 years ago, this was not considered good at all. They thought the only thing that was worth having was the hard drive, and you had to have a perfect hard drive image with a hash value that could be reproduced. And anything transient, like up in memory, was a waste of your time because there's no way to collect that without altering the data. You have to run some kind of process on the machine you're investigating. However, people have gotten over that because this is no different than anybody that does like a forensic analysis of blood splatters or on a dead body or something. You have to change the evidence to analyze it. That is the normal situation, and computer forensics and computer instant response people are in the same boat. Now you just have to be an expert. You have to go to court and say, yes, I did run the software on the evidence machine to capture data, but I am an expert and I'm capable of telling what evidence is really what was there and what evidence is the artifacts that I created while gathering the evidence, just like everybody else. So you can choose a tool, typically just a script, but using a DOS or Bash is good enough. There are commercial products, but none of them are that impressive. The tools to analyze machines are quite mature, things like Encase and FTK, but incident responders often use custom tools. By the way, if you're going to use OS commands, you should not be running the commands that are native on the system. You should bring in an image with copies of those commands, like directory and PS and so on, because that way you don't have to use potentially corrupted versions of those. So you collect the data that's important, you try to make it snappy, less than an hour per system, and make sure you output it in a good way. So you want all the running connections, all the running processes, the network connections, all the logs. That's typically your main priority. And then some people try to always collect all of the RAM or all the hard drive, but that's really out of date. That's a really old way to do it. This just creates a huge bunch of work for later. You want to start with this live response to narrow it down, and then only do this when you have to on a small number of systems. So you want everything about the time zones. Those are really important because clocks are often set wrong, and you have to synchronize things, all kinds of information about the machine, all the software, all the automated tasks and things that run after boot ups, all the user accounts, because they're often making new ones, all the networking information, and all the running processes, configuration, all the logs, including, of course, antivirus logs and such, all the files, including timestamps. And so then you're done. Now, if you do want to do complete RAM capture, then you have to run a special program to copy the contents of RAM, and then you'll have to run a special program to analyze the contents of RAM. So anyway, whatever you do, practice on a test system first to make sure that your procedure does work and finds the data you're looking for and doesn't cause problems. And if it requires you plugging in a USB or something, or using a network address, then you should consider what happens if you have a system where those things are broken. So all the machines you investigate may very well be infected with malware. So this means anything you connect to them might also get infected. And it means any files or any passwords that you use on it are potentially compromised going to the bad guys. So you have to be aware of that. So whatever you do, document it. This has saved me a lot. I always kept very meticulous notes when I was doing financial work, and it has saved me a lot of times when I would do something that maybe was wrong. But if I knew exactly what I did, I was in a much better position than if I say, well, I don't really know what I did. So that's the game. Use text-based scripts are generally what you use to avoid having an unnecessary impact on it. Graphics tools consume more memory and do more harm to the system while investigating it. So the best thing is if you can automate the collection process, because you want to run exactly the same script on many machines, and you also don't want to be making mistakes and changing your mind and typing on an evidence system. To make it easy to understand what you did and justify it later, you want to say, I ran this script and here's exactly what the script did. That would be nice. Of course, things often go wrong, but That would be the ideal situation, to have just a complete script that's pre-planned that you just run once, and that gives you everything you need. And so try to modify it as little as possible. Don't try to use the evidence machine to do analysis. Just copy the data off it and analyze the copy. So here's the kind of mistakes people made. One is copy the toolkit to the affected systems, save collected data back on that same system. So they make a folder on the evidence system and put the data there. This is a terrible idea, of course, because you don't know that the data is being collected accurate. It's overwriting evidence that you do. This is foolish. Another thing is make a script that just logs into everything as domain administrator on every machine. So you're just exposing those credentials. And this is the old system everybody used to use. Pull out the plug, image the hard drive, ignore everything else. That was the recommended procedure 10 or 15 years ago, but not anymore. All right, so the right thing is something like this. You have a network share with all your tools on it. You have some throwaway credentials that are never used for anything else. You got a read-only folder containing all the software you need, so that can't be modified or infected. And you have a writable folder where the data goes on the network to collect it. So you browse to the share, run the live response program. It then images them, collects the evidence, throws it over the network, and then you move it from there to some kind of storage server. When you analyze your evidence, you should use a machine that is not connected to the internet. They call this work in isolation. All right. You may want to copy things to external media, and that may be a problem if you have hardware failure. Another option you might do is use an encrypted network tunnel to move data off. So you can use software like CryptCat, or quite a lot of software can make a network tunnel. All right, if you have some strange system with a weird operating system, which is increasingly common because now we have the Internet of Things and smart devices, and you don't know what you're running there, then you might not be able to run your standard script, and you're just going to have to perform a manual live response where you get some kind of listing of whatever you can from it. I've had to do this on unfamiliar systems sometimes, and I just get a very incomplete set of data. Here's something else to understand, by the way, from real normal computer forensics. The evidence is the human. So, I mean, cops have done things like find a phone and they don't have any software at all, and all they do is page through the messages and take pictures with a camera. And that's evidence. It's not perfect, it's not getting it 100%, but it's evidence. The real evidence is I saw it, it was on the phone. You don't have to always get all the evidence or do a perfect process. You just have to get what you reasonably can and write down what you did so you can explain later why you did it that way. Anyway, all right, so that's the game. And if you're going to have a bunch of these, then make a checklist and try to prepare for it. And it'd be nice if you can automate it. It'd be a whole lot better if everything you do is always following down a nice checklist, but you can almost never really stick to a checklist all the way. That's an old military adage, and no plan survives contact with the enemy. But still, the closer you can be to being consistent, the better it'll be. Especially if you want to start training junior staff and having them doing some of the work, it would be a lot better if they can just have a script to follow. All right, I think that's as many as we had last time. All right. All right, so the suspect reinstalled the OS to hide evidence. Now what should you do? Okay, this really happened to one of the investigators I know. And the point is, Now you've wiped out the live running processes and the RAM, but you have not erased the hard drive. If you capture the whole hard drive image, you can recover the deleted files. And reinstalling the OS does not overwrite the whole hard drive at all, but only a small portion of it. Most of the evidence is still there if you take a hard disk image and then recover deleted files. All right, you find a few infected machines on a large network. How would you do that? Live response, this is essentially what we're doing with coronavirus testing, right? You don't try to get all the evidence, you do a probe that carefully probes for this particular file or registry key or something to see which machines are infected. That's what a live response is. All right, you find child pornography. Now what should you do? You can't touch it. You can't see it. It's a felony to see it or copy. You can't make any copy of it. Your investigation is over. Whatever you thought was so important, it's not important anymore. You hand that stuff to the FBI and you get it out of your world. You don't want to be anywhere near that stuff. You hand it over to government agencies and then you try to carry on without it. All right, your investigation is going to go to court and you need complete evidence. So what should you collect? Yeah, everything you can get, typically the whole RAM and the whole hard drive, and you might get this live response too for convenience. You clearly need everything. All right. All right, a jealous husband wants you to image his wife's laptop. What should you do? There you go. This also happened to one of my students. The problem is you need her permission. An angry husband cannot authorize you to go on somebody else's machine. You're going to end up committing a crime and having to defend yourself. So that's no good. All right. All right. Good. All right. LY. All right. Good. All right, so then we talk about the specific systems. Windows, which is, of course, the #1 most important one. Mandiant makes a kit called Mandiant Redline. I found this thing to be completely worthless. I tried for years to add this to my class. It just didn't run well enough at all. It comes with a file. You can make this script to run. I found it just better to write your own script. Anyway, this is what most people do. You just make your own toolkit. You just make a script that runs a few commands to find out what's going on the machine. With things like this, system info, net user to get the network list of users, IP config and route and ARC to get the network connections. You just use a bunch of native commands. You can get tools. There's tools you can get like Microsoft Auto Runs is very much worth getting, like Unstable Jimmy was asking earlier, to get a list of all the things that are going to automatically launch. And there's a lot of other things out there that will give you a list of running processes and logs. These are all very good. You should not be running the native copy of these. You should be bringing them in on your list, and you probably should have a system to rename all the tools so that you can tell that I did not run the IP config that was on the evidence machine. I ran my copy of IP config from my trusted read-only share, which is good. That way you'll know that you did the right thing. Prefetch is important, as we talked about in the project, so you see what has been recently launched on the machine, restore points, browser history, and so on. So you just write a script that does this. Typically, you just use an MS-DOS batch script because every machine has DOS on it. Well, these days you might use PowerShell. You could use these other scripting languages depending on your environment if you really have Perl or Python installed on all your Windows machines, but most people don't have that stuff installed. And certainly you would not want to add something big like that to a machine. You'd want to just use whatever is already there. All right, so make a file with a log of it all, compute a checksum of it, like an MD5 hash or something. Make sure you haven't overlooked things, like assume there's a certain link to file names or something, and test it before you rely upon it. If you want to collect memory, there are tools out there like FTK Imager Lite, Memorize, Windows Memory Toolkit, and you use Procmon, I think, ProcDump in the projects here to image on a process. So there's a Mandiant Memorize has a command line tool to image all the memory. FTK Imager Lite is a nice graphical tool that will just make a file of a copy of the contents of memory in a file which you can analyze later. Now the problem is once you have dumped memory, you just have this block of data and it doesn't have files and folder names to open. You just have to sort of carve it with a tool. It's got fragments of data that have to be sort of reassembled. So Mandiant Memorize is one of the big tools that does this, and there are other ones to try to make sense of it. So here's one of the things I did a while ago. We had this TeamViewer running. And if you were running TeamViewer and connecting to another machine, there was a password, and it left the password in plain text in memory. So you could dump the memory from it and find the password in there, just the same way that they found the credit card numbers when they hacked Target. They were just sitting there in memory. This is how I found a bunch of passwords when I gave a talk at Hope years ago. So, all right. And you've got a project here where you go surf a website and then you find the websites you've been going to in the memory of the machine. Anyway, then on Unix-based systems, it's very much the same. There is something called linres, but it's badly out of date. Mostly, again, the best thing is just make your own script. Typically, you just make a bash script. You could use something else, but you could, in principle, use any language that is going to be installed on the systems you're analyzing, but bash is the simplest typically. Apples have a system profiler tool that will give you a nice long list of all the software and logs and everything on the machine, so that's nice. Here it is. I ran it on one of my machines. You have VMware Fusion with XP installed on it. It detected the camera and so on. It detected the system logs. You know, it gives you a long list of information about the machine, which is pretty nice. Then you got all your typical Unix commands. You got date. You can get your installed software. Mount df and fdisk will give you the file system. You can get the kernel version. A list of the cron jobs, which are the scheduled tasks, which is a really common place for malicious things to be put. Services, user accounts, network information, drivers, you know, just have a series of these commands to harvest all that information, open files, history of commands, system logs, and so on. Just same old stuff. So you have a nice output of just a bunch of log files that you can then hopefully find your indicators of compromise. All right, and there used to be in older versions of Linux, you could just mount the memory the same way as it was a hard drive and then just image it that way. And there's tools that can do this still, Linux Memory Extractor, if you do want to image the memory on a Linux machine. But this Lime tool, it's a Linux kernel module. And so it must be customized for each version of Linux. It's a little bit clumsy to do. I don't think there is something good like Mandiant Memorize for Linux. It'd be nice if there were. Now you can use DD to just make a complete duplicate of any storage device, but that will just copy it and you won't have any checksums or anything. So the Digital Forensics Lab from the US government made these tools called DC3DD and so on, DCFLDD, which will capture something and then add a checksum to it, which is nice. All right. And there is Memorize for the Mac. Okay. I don't know how well it works. I know Mac tools, by the way, tend to go away fast because Apple keeps updating stuff really fast and the free ones are usually no good. And I think about 5 years ago, Mac started compressing all their memory. So the stuff in Mac memory is not just sitting there. You have to decompress it. So, you know, it's typically, if you're serious about it, you get Black Bag. Black Bag makes a series of very expensive, very good tools to analyze Mac systems. And that would be the real professional way to go. All right. And you can use, there's a thing called G-Core to dump one process off a Mac if you want to. So, you know, there are tools available to do a live response, but to take a whole image and analyze it, I think you wouldn't have much luck unless you pay for an expensive commercial tool, really, on a modern Mac. Anyway, that's why I don't have projects where you're doing that, because you can't really do it with free tools, as far as I can tell. The only free tools work if you have really old Macs, like more than 5 years old. I think that might be it. I'll give it a few more seconds. Ah, okay. All right. All right. Which one works only on Macs? System Profiler, good. All right. Which one is Mandiant tool? Redline, yep. All right. All right, which tool will run on some Windows 7, but not all of them? That's Python. You can run Python. You can have Python on a Windows machine, but it's not there by default. So it'll only sometimes be there. Batch scripts will run on any Windows machine. All right. All right, what will gather the RAM on Windows and Mac? Memorize has a Mac version. Although I say I'm a little skeptical about how well it might work on the latest Macs, but anyway, it does exist. All right, Flores is won twice. And Raymond, all right. Oh, wow, good. All right. Good, I got those scores. All right, I'll stop the recording and I'll